everyone. Welcome to the Beaver Sports Show. We are here for our first episode this year. I am Alex Luther, and I am the OMN Sports Editor.
And this is Soren Carr, fairly new to everything. Thanks for having me on, Alex.
Absolutely. How have you liked working here at Orange Media Network so far?
It's been great. Only thing so far that I've really done is on working for play-by-play for the Beavers thus far. Trying to go through some applications so I can literally work here, but at the moment, this is nice.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of a process getting you in here. As Soren mentioned, we've been doing some play-by-plays for football so far this season, so if you haven't caught us yet, we will be on for Stanford, a 4 p.m. kickoff this Saturday. But in the meantime, let's talk about what's been going on in Beaver sports so far. You know, this is coming into the first week of school. For those who are not aware, students had their first day of classes back. How was your first day of officially being back here at school gone for you so far, Soren?
It's been busy, senior year. Things are interesting, trying to get into that real life, real world mentality, but nonetheless, I'm excited. It's been good. A lot of freshmen walking around. You see some new faces. It's beautiful outside here, so can't complain.
That is true. Also, as a senior, it was funny. I was walking on campus today, and I felt old for the first time since I have been here at Oregon State. Walking around and seeing freshmen being excited, I was like, man, I feel old and I feel tired.
I do
somehow 4 years does that to you.
4 years, stress, a lot of things going on, but
of course,
we got sports.
I know we have that. At least it's going to be consistent. It's something to look forward to. So we'll tell you a little bit about ourselves since this is the first show. As I said, I'm Alex. I'm the Orange Media Network sports editor here. Kind of started some in the summer, but definitely getting right into the groove here. We've got some really cool things planned for this year. Some really fun coverage, really great things that are groundbreaking. I think you guys will be really excited about as we get some of it with the ball rolling. We're definitely looking for more people to get involved. So if you're interested, please, we need more riders. We would love for you to come join our team. We're looking for really amazing people. And if you're listening in, you're definitely one of those, I promise. Who would not want to get paid to cover sports? Am I right?
Come join. It's worth it. I'm not even getting paid right now. I'm having a blast. Why wouldn't you join?
Exactly. Soren's saying it for me. He's selling the pitch for me. Do you want to come and do my job and sell the pitch for everybody?
This is no act.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. So, grew up a Beaver fan. This is definitely like the dream job for me, getting to work here at Oregon State, work with an organization that I love here at Orange Media Network, and get paid to cover sports. And you can too if you come and join. So, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Soren?
My name is Soren, if you didn't catch that part, but I am a senior, majoring in speech communication, minoring in business entrepreneurship, looking to be more involved in school. I fortunately ran upon an email from Alex that invited all to essentially try out for play-by-play for the Beavers, a TV position, anything within KBVR or the Barometer, which is the student-run paper. And so I came down to Corvallis from Portland, where I live, and I set up an interview. It happened to work out, and I got to sit in and pretty much get mentored in a way by Alex and Mitch, who is another longtime play-by-play individual for the Beavers, and I grew an interest immediately.
Yeah, and he's been here ever since, and now we've got a good team rolling, and we're excited. So let's kick this off. We're going to start with the way these shows will usually go for y'all who are listening. The first half of the show will be some recap of what's been going on in Oregon State athletics, and the second half is we're going to dive a little bit deeper into analysis, a little bit more about what's been going on in the season, and kind of work from there. So you ready?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Perfect. All right, so let's talk about football first. We'll get back to football a little bit later, but let's talk a little bit first about how their season has gone so far. What are your thoughts so far? Just little bits. We'll get more into analysis, but kind of giving a little quick overview of a snapshot of the season.
Compared to the last 2 years, I'm highly optimistic. I'll say that because coaching changes, the transitions, we keep saying it's a rebuilding year for the Beavers. I think that this truly is one that can lead to some positivity in the future with a strong offense right now. We have some strong leadership roles, upperclassmen, but we also have a young team. Recently, we also got a transfer from USC, I just saw.
Yes, if you have not been tracking, we had 4-star wide receiver who was originally with USC, Devin Williams, is transferring to Oregon State per some sources. So we'll see if he's able to clear some paperwork there. Curious to see if he'll have to give up any eligibility, but that's a big snag for the Beavers in terms of recruiting and in terms of keeping a really strong team as they move forward, especially when they look at really strong receivers with Isaiah Hodgins and with Tyjon Lindsey. So having some of those opportunities, I think, are a big deal.
Absolutely. I mean, you can look back at the early 2000 team, late 90s with Dennis Erickson, bringing in a lot of transfers, maybe some JUCO guys that are overlooked in a way.
Yeah.
And so this is a terrific start for it. I mean, you can't expect anything better from that. 4-star recruit isn't as common as it could be as a USC or an Oregon, but we have those diamonds in the rough already, but this looking up.
Yeah, of course. So just to kind of give a recap of where we're at with football, they are looking at a 1-2 start to the season. Their first home game, which was the first game that they had for the whole season, which they haven't had a lot of season openers in the recent years at home, was versus Oklahoma State. That was a loss at 52-36 on August 30th, followed up by a loss in Hawaii. Hawaii was on a bit of a roll as they had that win. Yeah, Hawaii had the win versus Arizona the week before and a very close win. And then it was disappointing, mostly because the Beavers didn't score at all in the second half versus Hawaii. The final score there was 31-28, finished on a field goal win there by the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors. That was on September 7th. But they're coming off of a win with the win versus the Cal Poly Mustangs at a 45-7 score on September 14th. And then their next game will be up here Saturday versus Stanford at Research Stadium at 4 p.m. So any big pieces that you feel like you want to hit there as we're talking about football in the overview?
Based on the first 3 games, it's nice that we have a bye week coming into Pac-12 play.
Yeah.
That's not as common for a lot of teams. I think we found a little bright spot in our rebuilding against Cal Poly. I know they're an FCS team. We have struggled against them in the past. However, we played a legit team in Oklahoma State with an air raid offense who happened to run it all over us. That was a big question mark coming into the season with defense. And we impressed early with our offense, and we did that again against Hawaii. However, we could not close. And you and I discussed that before the game of Cal Poly. We were wondering if they could continue to turn the wheels up, I guess, in a way. I mean, against Cal Poly, they continued it throughout the game. Hawaii, Oklahoma State, different stories, but their fast starts and slow finishes were something we were looking at, and they continued it, and they held them to single digits, which is huge.
Yeah, I really like how you put that about the fast starts and the slow finishes. I think that's a good way of putting what they've struggled with in the past, and we'll get a little bit more into that later. Let's kind of transition here as we talk about a few more sports and some recaps and overviews. Let's talk about women's soccer. What are your thoughts on women's soccer?
Women's soccer. Some excitement on campus, I must say.
Absolutely.
You hear some people talking about it. I have some friends bringing it up who would not expect to have been following soccer that much in general, but they're pretty hyped up about them. Ranked number 20 in the NCAA women's coaches poll. That's huge.
Yeah. And for those who aren't aware, women's soccer here at Oregon State has started off with an 8-0 season. Okay, that's a great start, but the second you start looking at last season, they had 2 wins total in the entire season. That was it. They had like 2 wins and I think it was 14 losses or something around there. It was
around that point.
Right around that point. It was pretty significant. And then they brought in Matt Kagan as the new head coach, and all of a sudden, it is a brand new team out there. I don't know what he did. I don't know what strategies he's implementing, but he's turned the straw into gold. Absolutely. So they're looking at an 8-0 season. They have had within that multiple shutouts, and they are outscoring their opponents 21-3 in the first 8 games of the season. So without getting super into detail, their last couple games, they had a game at Rice, and they won that 2-1 on September 12th. At Houston, 5-0 on September 15th, and they just recently had a home game versus Idaho, 2-1 win on September 19th, and then they're moving into Pac-12 play. That's the big piece to remember here. This upcoming Saturday, they're playing at Washington State, which is also a ranked team. Washington State is ranked 21 in the country per one of the polls that I was looking at earlier. That game is at 7 p.m., and that's the first conference game that the women's soccer team will be facing. So what are kind of some of your thoughts here as we're talking about this women's soccer team?
I'm impressed with their ability to go to an environment such as Rice or Houston.
Oh,
the
absolutely.
Humidity, out of state. With soccer, you don't see teams traveling as much maybe as for football or something, but that's impressive. I mean, going down to an environment you're not comfortable with, probably a different crowd, who knows what's going on down there, but some humidity, different atmosphere. Handling it in that way is pretty impressive.
Exactly.
Props to coach.
And I think part of that too is you look at the Rice game, they played really gritty in that game. That was an OT win, a last minute shot there to be able to pull off the win. It was pretty impressive. So not only are they playing outside of their environment, they're playing in really gritty ways.
They're a tough squad.
They are really tough.
Absolutely.
Also within that, Washington State is right now 7-1 for the season. Their only loss has been to Michigan, and Michigan has also been a top 25 team so far this season. Not necessarily top 25 at this moment, but they've been ranked at top 25 at other points in this season. That's going to be tough, but also I think this is a really big moment for the team. This is their opportunity to say, hey, we actually know what we've been doing. Just because we've gotten some wins against some schools, we're going to start making a big difference and make a huge splash in conference play. That's what's going to shoot them up in the rankings, and they're going to start to be a force to be reckoned with, which even creates the story to a whole nother level when you think about having 2 wins, and then if they can start to pull off some of these big conference wins, they're going to be absolutely unstoppable. We're going to start looking at a program that all of a sudden the recruiting is going to get better, facilities are going to start to become a higher priority, and we're going to start to be a school that with this one coach and with this one overturn of a year, all of a sudden it's going to be Oregon State's a women's soccer school. It's going to be a big deal.
We see some similarities here to the basketball program with Scott
Thinking about that.
coming from George Fox, small program, working his way in, building a close relationship not only with the players but the staff, the students.
Yes.
Well-respected member already. Won himself a couple of Pac-12 titles. In a stacked elite conference, as Bill Walton says.
Yes.
But for women's sports specifically, you have UCLA, you have Berkeley, you have ASU, you have USC. All these schools are stacked in women's soccer, women's basketball,
volleyball.
All of these, they're ridiculous. And the fact that they're going head-to-head with all of them in Corvallis, Oregon, being able to recruit all these kids and gel them together in the way that both coaches have, it's incredible.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking about that. As soon as I finished talking, you were like, it reminds me of basketball. I was like, oh, yes. And I'm really glad you brought that up because I don't think people realize that it was the same thing when Ruick came, that it was a very deep program in terms of that they had not had successful
Struggles
seasons.
in the past.
Oh, yeah,
Absolutely.
big struggles. And to turn it around and be like, we're going to go to the WNIT and we're going to win Pac-12 championships and we're going to make it to the NCAA tournament.
Go to the Final Four.
And then we're going to go to the Final Four. And then to make like the Sweet 16 like several years in a row. It's really impressive, and it's something that I think I don't know what that is. There's some kind of piece here that Oregon State is able to get a couple of these gems, and I think there's some hope that is going to start for programs like football and for programs like a new head coach in baseball, because we've seen that it can happen. We see that why can't it be Oregon State? And I think that soccer is going to be a really telling moment to say we've done it with women's basketball, and we're going to do it with women's soccer. We're going to bring in another coach for baseball. Baseball's another discussion. We can talk about that when we get a little bit closer, but I definitely think that there's a really interesting piece there that you're bringing up. Any other thoughts about women's soccer before we transition on?
Watch the games.
I'm very curious. I have never been a big soccer person. Soccer's tough for me to watch,
Really?
but I am really excited. I think that I'm going to get really into women's soccer this year.
I think the national team this summer really did a number for people.
I know.
In a great way. Seeing them win the World Cup again.
See, exactly. I was never into that. Like, soccer was not something that was my thing. But I was following along with the women's soccer team. I was traveling, so I wasn't able to watch a lot of the games, but was tracking, and it was really exciting and really empowering to see those big discussions, those really big wins.
Rapinoe.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. So I think that it is of any time, of any era, that our women's soccer team should be big. Now is the perfect time. Exactly.
Came along at the right time.
Exactly. So I'm really excited for this season. I think that they've got a great opportunity ahead of them. I think that they're going to be one to watch. I think nobody was expecting this. I remember last year we were talking about it, and we're like, man, if they could just get one more win. And we're doing the same discussion with football. You know, we're like, let's just get one more win, and before you know it, everything clicks and light bulbs go on, and it's a whole different program.
Well, you see, even if they struggle in Pac-12 play, we know how legitimate the conference is in terms of soccer play, both from a men's and women's standpoint. But the fact that they started in this way, with the way they've traveled and who they have on their team with a new coach and everything, you should be thrilled.
Oh, yeah. That's the other thing, too, when we start talking about other sports, is that they're so strong in some of these sports for the Pac-12. Or when we start talking about later with football with the Pac-12, you start to have some question marks about, is it strong or is it weak? But there are definitely sports, and sports like baseball and women's basketball and soccer, both the soccer programs, they have really strong programs nationally, and they're stacked. And so you should be afraid to play those people. But if you can hold your own, it's going to make a big difference when the women's soccer team starts to face these big conference teams.
You see the ones that aren't as highly publicized, for example, rowing, wrestling, track Town USA is 45 minutes away.
Oh,
You always consider, like, beach volleyball. I remember visiting a friend down at USC a couple years ago, won like back-to-back national championships. Don't quote me on this, but it just seems like all those schools, intellectual schools in a way, that we're sneaking up with. You know?
You did quote Mr. Bill Walton, and we are the Conference of Champions.
Conference of Champions.
But that is in a lot of sports. It is beyond just what people would expect of those big major sports. It comes in a lot of forms of titles. So let's transition a little bit now into men's soccer. Men's soccer had a pretty decent season last year. Also had a kind of tough season a couple years ago. So last year was considered a growth for them in a sense. They are 5-3 so far for this season. An update on their past couple games: they played at home versus UC Santa Barbara on September 15th and lost 2-3. Followed up with a win in their first Pac-12 game of the season versus UCLA, a 2-0 win on September 19th. And then also they just recently played San Diego State and won 2-1 on September 22nd. So just a few days ago here. So we were waiting on those scores. And their next game will be this upcoming Sunday, September 29th versus UC Davis, a home game at 7 p.m. at Paul Lawrence Field. So got any kind of info, any insights, thoughts on men's soccer here?
From last year, when I remember looking at them, following Beaver athletics and stuff, I saw they were ranked a pile of times.
Yeah.
Haven't been up to date with them as much as possible, partly because of the women's success.
Oh, yeah.
And my interest kind of stems to them.
I feel that.
For a sport I don't follow as often as basketball or football, you kind of gear towards the ones that are successful.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say I'm a fair weather fan, but in this case, it kind of looks to be that way.
It's a lot of sports. You got to pick and choose what you can track. You can't spread your time with all of them.
It's true.
So kind of interesting there. Men's soccer's, they're moving to UC Davis. They have a very, very long stretch of away games. I think after this UC Davis game, they have about 5 or 6 away games, if I'm remembering correctly, and then finish it with about 4 or 5 home games. So they have a very long stretch where for several weeks they're away game, away game, away game, away game. So I think what they're going to really want to be focusing on is longevity and the ability to have the sustainability to process through all of those. That's a lot of away games. Away games are really tough. They're tough for these guys because they're students. I think people sometimes forget that these athletes are student athletes. They're students first. So they're spending so much time on the road that is impacting their grades, which is impacting their stress level, which in turn is impacting their performance on the field. I'm curious. I don't know. I'm not even sure why they have such a long stretch. I'm curious to see if that was a Pac-12 thing or if that was a school thing for that stretch to be so long. Yeah. But I definitely think that's going to take a large toll, and I think we might see a dip there. But they'll come back home for a few games, and I think that'll be interesting.
True. And based off last year, we clearly have the talent. Hassani Whiteside, Don Sciallo, both picked in the MLS draft. We were talking about this at our sports court meeting.
Yeah.
Son Dotson.
Yes.
Now killing it at Minnesota United FC.
Oh, yeah. So we've had some good players in the program. I think we're just waiting on some time for them to be able to transition in, and they're working on some of those transitions. But I definitely think this will be a test. I'm curious to see. I really am curious. I don't know if it's something on the Pac-12 side or what that allowed for such a long stretch, because it is long. It's, we're looking at 3 or 4 weeks where they're on the road. That's a lot to ask for players that aren't being paid to be in these positions, that are students on top of this. Their bodies are taking a toll. They're traveling to places. They're on a plane. It's easier to get sick. The stress levels go up. So I think that we'll probably see a dip, but it's tough. You can have all the talent in the work, but they're still humans. So it's going to be tough.
A whole other topic there.
It does. Any thoughts on that topic?
Why are these players not paid?
Oh, yes.
I have some thoughts on it.
Feel free to share.
Well, personally, looking into it, I do think it is unfair that NCAA players are not paid or compensated in some ways, which they are. granted, you have some high recruits going
Yeah.
to different schools that do get paid, quote unquote,
or
they just shovel it underneath the table. But it's only typically for basketball or football because that's where most of the donors put the money.
Yep.
It's unfair, as in many situations. But as someone who previously played a sport, even if it was at a Division III school in golf,
Yeah.
the time commitment is obscene.
Astounding.
No, it really is. I mean, I cannot believe some of these players and the fact that some of them are academic All-Americans or anything of that sort. Take serious determination, or they're just robots. Who really knows? We can't really tell. I mean, some of these people, I mean, they're physical specimens on their own, but it's pretty cool to see.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my younger brother, it's his first week of college, and he's playing baseball for the local community college where my family's from. And he jokes that he just signed his life away for community college baseball. So if he's saying that, you got to imagine what these D1 Power 5 conference athletes are facing. And when you start to throw into the mix these really long stretches of traveling away from home, family, friends, school, support systems, it's incredibly tough. And when you have that on top of the fact that you don't have that kind of financial support and you're just pouring all of your time and your energy into this, it can be really tough. And that's a whole, like you said, that's a whole other discussion, but I think it's an important one. Maybe not for the full extent for today, but definitely one to keep in mind. We could have a
segment on it.
We could have a segment. I like that idea.
Love that.
I like having a segment. It's especially because they're opening up more discussions about it. There's the NCAA is questioning more about what does it look like to support student athletes. And then you have all the questions about should student athletes be sponsored, and there's just lots of things that play around there. And I think that it would also be interesting if you look at it from the perspective of in some sports you can be drafted early, and if you're drafted, like for football, after 3 years of eligibility, you can be drafted and join the NFL. Yeah. If you had some kind of paid stipend, would that push you to stay in school for another year? Or does the risk of or does the risk of injury push you to want to join into a pro program if you're not even sure if you're going to start or have pay, or if you're not going to have a degree?
Pay difference there.
Exactly.
Exactly like we were talking about with women's soccer, equal pay.
Oh, yeah. The pay difference is definitely huge. So it's different. So it's different for, a men's basketball player who's thinking about this than a women's basketball player.
Be looked upon as a sexist format here.
Yeah.
We've got a whole segment here we can talk about.
We're digging deep. I love it.
For sure.
So for sure. I think that it's interesting, and my heart goes out to these players. I'm hoping, obviously, the program is set up that they have supports, that they have answers, that they have things that they can do so that way they're able to be successful on the road. But it definitely is a tough piece about saying how do we support these student athletes as they're going for 5 weeks on the road. Let's move on to our last sport. To recap, we have volleyball. Volleyball's been kind of in a tough spot the past couple of years. Since I've been here as a student, I'm a senior, they've had hot starts, and then they'll kind of have a dip off, or they'll play really well. They'll have one or two big upsets, but then they'll still have games that they should be winning not be as successful. So far they are 6-5 for the season, with a few major losses, one to Oklahoma and one to Indiana.
This is some big time matchups there.
Oh yeah, especially they lost to Northern Colorado, which I think I'm not sure I know a lot about their program, but they also lost to Colorado State. Colorado State's considered a top 5.
Colorado State's ranked, yeah.
Yeah,
Colorado State and Oregon, they play Oregon next. Two legit programs.
Exactly. So they're playing top programs. So they've got some opportunities to have some kind of upset, but then they also lost to Cal Poly. So it's interesting that they didn't play too bad against Colorado State, but they lost to Cal Poly, and they're getting ready to face 2 ranked teams when they start coming up next. Within that, they play tomorrow, which is Thursday, versus Oregon, which is a Civil War matchup. Keep that in mind. At Gill Coliseum at 5:30 p.m. This is their first conference game of the season, and as I said, it's a Civil War matchup. So that's big all of a sudden. You throw Civil War into the mix, and the game is automatically a big deal. People are going to care. Exactly. Rivalry games are worth it. Oregon is currently ranked 24 in the country. They're 4-5 in the season. However, 3 of their 5 losses have been to top 10 teams. So even though they have 5 losses, I was looking, 3 of those 5 losses were to teams that were ranked in the top 10 when they played them. They played in some really big tournaments.
Were these close losses, or?
Yeah, they were pretty close. So whether or not they're considered a top program, they've played against top programs, so they're ranked still despite having 5 losses, because the people that they lost to, those were big teams, they're big programs. So I think that's going to be tough. And then also they faced Colorado on Friday at Gill Coliseum at 6 p.m. Colorado has an 8-2 season. They have 2 losses, and their 2 losses are to Colorado State. Colorado State, who Oregon State also lost to, and is currently ranked 17. Colorado State, somehow, they came out of nowhere because Colorado, when they played them, CSU was not ranked at the time, but Colorado State is now ranked 17. So Colorado has been considered a top team and within the top 25 as well by some analysts. So Oregon State has a couple really tough matchups when they start coming forward into conference play right here.
I recall Colorado State being ranked in the top 10 or so a few seasons ago, mainly because I have family in Fort Collins, so kind of keep up on them, or I just hear it from my family. But was it Stanford who upset number 1 Nebraska? I think that happened last week.
Volleyball. That's very possible. You might know a little bit more than me about that.
I recall seeing something about that. I can check in.
We're working on covering more and tracking more sports. I promise we're trying.
We care.
We do care.
That's why we're here. Don't worry.
My goal as sports editor, to put it out there, is to have coverage of every sport at some time, in some way, shape, or form. That is a goal, and I think it's important. It
was Stanford. Nebraska volleyball was number 1 in the country. They were actually at home against number 2 Stanford. It's a dream matchup, 1 versus 2 in any sport. That's incredible. In a sold-out stadium, I believe, the Devin Center in Nebraska. But they beat them 3-1.
Wow. So that wasn't even like a 3-2.
No.
That's impressive. So that's got to be kind of scary, too, for the Beavers, is that they're going to have Stanford on this slate.
Stanford's got to be ranked.
Oh, yeah. Now they've got to be ranked now.
They were number 2, yeah.
That's impressive. That's a big deal, too, because you're talking about, some of the sports. Volleyball is another one where, as a conference, the Pac-12 is a big deal. Stanford is consistently one. So I believe that it was a year or 2 ago that the Beavers did upset Stanford. So that was one where they had an upset. They beat someone that they shouldn't have beat. I believe it was either them or Washington. But within that, then they have games against like Cal Poly where you'd expect them to have a win, but then they lose 1-3. So I think it's tough. I think that, I don't know if it's the program or what, but I think it'll be something to watch this season is, I would expect probably 1 or 2 upsets from them, something that you're not expecting because they've done it in the past, but continue to maybe see a couple losses that you aren't expecting either.
In a sport like volleyball, as little as I know about it and as little as I've played,
yes,
I'm curious if it's unique in the fact that the teams go on runs in a sense that basketball happens. There's so many games.
Oh, yeah.
Indoors. I mean, there's subbing, a lot of subbing as what I recall from watching games. But maybe streakiness is a factor. I mean, in the NBA now, WNBA now, you see streaks are all that matter in basketball now because the three-pointer is so essential to each team. So that's a different area that we can go into. But volleyball, it kind of seems like could fall into that category in a way.
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting way of looking at it. I think that definitely happens. Like I said, I think that they've had pretty hot starts, and then they'll have dips, and then they'll get a really big win and have a couple more good starts. It could be the team.
Don't quote me on this, but
I do think that's an interesting way of looking at it. Is looking at it as they play indoors, they get kind of the streakiness, and then it's obviously all sports are mental, but you play in an aspect like that where you see a point go down, and that it was your team member's fault, but you have to continue to support the team member, whether or not you see they come together in a huddle every time after, whether or not it was your fault. It's different, I think, because it's significantly a defensive sport. It's not an offensive sport. Yeah. It's not like, oh, well, you missed that shot in basketball. Well, it's fine. Like you're going to get the ball again in 30 seconds. You could go without the ball or without the opportunity to score for a while in volleyball. It's a very highly defensive sport, which also means it falls a lot on your teammates when they aren't able to capitalize and they're not able to have that defensive play. And so then I think it becomes very much a mental sport because that final point could have been your fault, and it's different than a full team kind of aspect, I definitely think that's interesting.
There appears to be also a lot of camaraderie in it. I mean,
absolutely.
See how close they are. I mean, like you're saying, mental, if you hate one of your teammates, that's really going to hinder the outcome of a lot of games. I mean, if you're hugging them every game, they look really close, it's funny, but you don't see that as much. I mean, other than in basketball, them huddling up, volleyball, and them, they do have some similarities,
Yeah. Well, do you have any final spots or any final thoughts on our recap of sports before we dive deeper into the analysis?
I do not.
Alrighty. We're going to take a little bit of a break here in Corvallis, Oregon, and we'll see you back here in a couple of minutes to talk about analysis for Oregon State sports.
Estás sintonizando a KBVR 68.7 FM. Si tienes alguna sugerencia, quieres saludar o simplemente quieres hablar un ratico, llámame a 541-737-3737. Lo voy a decir otra vez, 541-737-3737. Siga sintonizando para la mejor música, con los mejores DJs, con lo mejor de la programación.
Summer's out and the new school year is in. OSU Program Council is kicking the year off at the end of summer Beaver Bash with a foam party in the SEC Plaza featuring DJ Condor, outdoor laser tag, life-size Hungry Hippos, and food trucks. Afterwards, all students are welcome to grab some late-night breakfast in the MU ballroom and have a chance to compete in or watch a live game show. Thanks to our sponsors, the MU, Dutch Bros, OSU Panhellenic, Bomalicious, The Domain, Orange Media Network, and Bob's Red Mill. The End of Summer Beaver Bash and Flapjack feed is on Friday, September 27th from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m.
As part of the federal law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, all children with special needs have a right to special education. The disability conditions could include physical impairments, chronic illnesses, intellectual disabilities, hearing and vision difficulties, speech or language impairments, emotional impairments, or learning disabilities. If you know a child who may have a disability, contact your school. If the child is 5 years or younger and you live in either Lynn or Benton County, contact the Lynn and Benton County Early Intervention Program at 541-753-1202 using extension 106. And if you live in Lincoln County, contact the Lincoln County Early Intervention Program at 541-574-2240 using extension 109.
Hey Beavers, let's talk about sleep. Did you know 2/3 of students experience extreme drowsiness in class, and that poor sleep habits can negatively impact your GPA? It's recommended to get between 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep each night. Blue light emitted from electronic devices hinders the production of melatonin, the hormone that readies you for sleep. If you have trouble falling asleep, try turning off screens at least 1 hour before going to bed, avoiding caffeine before 2 p.m., and maintaining a regular sleep schedule. CAPS wishes you a better sleep tonight.
Craft Center membership is now free for OSU students. Pyrography, raku firing, indigo dyeing, stained glass 3D modeling, screen printing, and more. Come take a class with the Craft Center. We're open Monday through Friday, 1 p.m. to 10 p.m., and Saturday and Sunday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Visit us in the basement of the Student Experience Center for more information and to sign up for your free student membership.
What's that sound?
Why, that's gotta be the majestic bald eagle.
Stop right there. I'm a bird nerd, and that's a red-tailed hawk. This is what a bald eagle really sounds like. OSU Bird Nerds is the student-run ornithological club at Oregon State University. We welcome all community members on and off campus to come and bird with us while learning about the newest research and gaining useful skills along the way. From field trips to professional developments, volunteer work, and all things birds, the Bird Nerds Club provides a space for birds of a feather to flock together. For more information on future events, you can visit osubirdnerds.weebly.com.
Alrighty, we are back in Corvallis again. I am Alex Luther.
I am Soren Carr.
Alrighty, we're gonna get into the nitty gritty of this. This is the part that I love. This is what I get excited about.
We know
with my
about
job.
this one, you know.
Yeah.
If you're listening, we had some struggles there with a few in other sports.
And I think that this is a great opportunity. We're going to start to get into some more analysis. That was something I really wanted to do in this position, is make sure that we're able to talk about analysis, because, man, sports fans, we get nerdy about stuff like this.
Yeah.
Like, we get nerdy about stats. We get nerdy about analysis and about pockets collapsing and about whether or not that shot was a fadeaway. And people look at us like we're crazy.
I wish we could be on the field, but then we really don't.
Yes, exactly. It's a lot more fun to sit in the stands, maybe sip a drink while you're chilling doing that.
We can run our mouths and watch them work their butts off. Yeah.
Exactly. We get to talk about this kind of thing instead of running 5 miles in the morning, which I appreciate. All right, so I want to talk about the Pac-12 rankings for football. For those of you who don't know, it's a little crazy right now. There have been some really unexpected upsets, both within the Pac-12 and outside the Pac-12, that personally, I don't even know what the heck is going on. So, Soren, what are your initial thoughts about what's going on with the Pac-12 football right now?
This is Pac-12 football at its finest in the last decade.
Oh, yeah.
The inconsistency, or shall I say, just inability to predict what's going to happen.
That's a good way of putting
is
it.
fascinating compared to any other conference in the country. Granted, Stanford and Oregon were the perennial powers for a stretch from 2009 to, I want to say, 2014, 2015. But even if they're still at the top every year or so, the Pac-12 North is absolutely dominated. But the last 3 years, compared to the others, have just been crazy.
Oh, yeah. We look at, like, you see Oregon in national titles. You see Washington in the college football playoffs. You see Stanford being a tough game for teams every year. And then you see the Pac-12 South have these peaks where, Arizona had a peak a few years ago. And then you see
Colorado.
USC. Yeah, Colorado had a peak. And now we're seeing Cal in the north, but we're also seeing now we're seeing Utah have a peak, and USC's even coming back, which nobody expected this year. So it's an interesting spot. So for example, let's talk about one game. I don't know if you're following this game very much, but the same day that Oregon State was playing in Hawaii, again, this was at a 6 p.m. kickoff in Hawaii. So
I know where you're going with this.
So for the poor Oregon State fans that were here, they were watching a game at 9, and I thought they had it bad. And then I got on social media after that game, and boy, oh boy, did our life seem so much easier in comparison, because those poor Cal and Washington fans were on an incredible 2.5 hour delay due to weather, lightning strike, power going out in the stadium. And it's at Washington, and Cal's there. And Cal, we're not looking at them as they're going to be a big powerhouse this season. They're not going to have that many wins. Oregon State is always kind of on the DL, they're going to be a semi-easy win for us. And by some God-given miracle, Cal pulls out a win after this huge upset. And not only that, then they have more wins in the season. It's just something like that. And you talk about Pac-12 after dark, and you talk about the Pac-12 being this competitive conference. That's what people think about. That's what people think about is a game like that.
I like to think of it in some ways as we're the outsiders in the West.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the SEC, you have the Big Ten, and it's funny because unlike most other areas in our country, the South and the Midwest are the focal point for college sports in a way.
Yes.
Football especially. And we have sports talk shows, Paul Feinbaum on the SEC network, and others that just have very little amount of respect, I'd say, for the West Coast.
Yes.
And it's forgotten because not a lot of people watch our games because they're coming on at 10:30 or later for the night games especially. So they just have a random one like this. Who would have thought Cal would beat Washington 2 years in a row?
Oh, yeah.
Unexpected. We knew that their defense was supposed to be good. They're
not that good.
True. They look fantastic, but
in terms of
up to Seattle?
No, yeah, in terms of you got to think too that game ended at past midnight. So of course no one on the East Coast is following this. That's a downside for Cal. That's a tough part for them to say, well, we want to get a bid for CFP to be able to say, well, we want to be in the top 4. How the heck can you do that if nobody on the East Coast is even up to watch your games? But then on the flip side, see, this is where I start to get really confused, is because we see a game like that and it's like, wow, Cal's going to be this big power. They're doing really great things. And then you see UCLA play Washington, and UCLA upsets Washington 67-63.
Yeah,
the over under on that game was 60.
Yeah.
How does something like that happen? That's where I start to get confused, is how are we looking at a conference where you have Cal, who is growing as a program, and Washington, who's growing as a program, and then UCLA, who nobody expected to win any Pac-12 games this season, pull an upset like that. That's where I get confused.
No one fits better in the Pac-12 than Chip Kelly. He's back at home.
Yeah.
Even if he has a rebuilding school, he's coming into a program that was struggling. But everyone I feel like had kind of that feel that he was underneath, just kind of hiding along. He's just Chip,
Yeah.
You might not like him if you're a Beaver fan based
That's
on
fair.
previous experiences, but 67-63, third highest scoring total in NCAA history, highest in the
incredible.
Pac-12. They were down by 39 points at one point.
Oh, yeah.
Half the stadium left after 2 quarters.
I would have left.
I would have left. I would have been very confident in our team's ability.
Oh, yeah.
Even though Oregon State Beavers, I would have picked
Yes.
to hold on against UCLA. We were talking about a possible win going down to UCLA. Now it's not looking like that.
Oh, who knows anymore? It's super interesting, too, because so I wasn't watching the game, and my dad had shot me something about the game about how incredible Washington State's quarterback had been doing, and he had like 3 or 4 touchdowns in the first half, and I was like, wow, this seems like it's going to be like cut and dry, no big deal, that's it. And then I'm like looking at my phone and freaking out. I was so shocked to see that UCLA of all teams is doing this. And also something interesting I think you bring up with Chip is when he was at Oregon, he was doing something nobody else was doing. He was
Changed
pulling
football.
that. Oh, he changed all of college football. He was like, no, we're going to start to do no huddle. We're going to make this fast. We're going to drive down these defenses. Everybody is going to have to become stronger, faster, more mentally tough just because of us. And they did. And then I think what his problem was is, he moves into pros and then he moves back into college. And he's trying to implement that, and he thinks that's his cutting edge. It's not the cutting edge anymore. It's now the norm. So he gets credited with that norm, but then he's got to come up with some other tactic to say what puts the team that I'm working with at the next level. And I think he's doing something crazy down there. I would not have expected to see them pull out a win like this over Washington State.
You have these revolutionary minds in sports. An example that I think of currently that I've heard plenty of sports analysts talk about is Andy Reid for the Chiefs, head coach, football coach. So he is an offensive-minded guy. He's been an offensive coordinator before. He coached the Eagles to 4 straight national champion or NFC championship games in the 2000s. Barely lost the Super Bowl to the Patriots, but he came over to Kansas City. He made the playoffs a couple times, and this guy, Pat Mahomes, comes in. You might have heard of him. Yeah.
I might have heard of him.
He's all right.
He's okay.
It's a similar.
He's a fantasy gold mine
here, exactly. But it's a similar routine here. I mentioned earlier Steph Curry in basketball.
Yeah.
We've got Chip Kelly changing that for college football. Now, currently, I feel that Andy Reid and this fast motion offense, no huddle. They still huddle. I mean, it's different. You can't take that. Players are more evenly balanced in the NFL as opposed to college, but there are these shifts in momentum that we're seeing more than ever. I feel like in sports, there are more people, there's more players. We have more of a ability to see it because of social media and other sources. But
social media is a big one.
I think that one to really think about there is how much Chip Kelly really changed football. And it's cool because it happened 45 minutes away from us. And Oregon became the center of the football universe for a little while. There. Flashy uniforms, fast-paced offense, Nike. It was
You want to share with everybody your little backstory with Oregon?
So, everyone.
so they can understand the
Soren
context here.
This is Soren speaking, not Alex. Just so you all know.
Good clarification.
I grew up as a diehard Duck fan, we could say.
Yeah.
Watched every game. I'm getting some thumbs down from some people here, but deservedly so. Now I go to Oregon State. My mind has changed.
There you go.
But
that's what we like to hear.
It's always tough to, let go of some things that you loved at once. Oregon football was a true love of mine. Maybe my first true love in a way.
Okay,
it might sound a little weird, but
that's fair.
I think we worked our way around and found the right place here. Rooting for the underdog is always better, but
it is. It's so much more fun.
Looking up.
Yeah, so to put it in contrast perspective, as I mentioned, lifelong Beaver fan, season ticket holders for football for 18 years. It's hard. I can agree that the simple fact of it is that he changed football and that he made it, but we're a little jealous. We didn't have the same resources, so that's just part of what the facts was. But it did put Oregon as a state on the map, which has positives and negatives. It put Oregon University of Oregon, on the map, but it also gave Oregon State the opportunity to say, hey, we need to make ourselves better too and step up to the plate. So let's transition back again into how would you rank Pac-12 right now? If you were looking at who was the top in the North, who's the top in the South, and kind of thinking about that, what would you kind of put the teams at for that point?
Off the top of my head, I firmly believe Oregon is the most talented team in the Pac-12. Consistently, I don't think that they will play to their potential all season based on the past couple of years, based on their bowl game last year especially, and the fact that they couldn't handle the game against Auburn.
Yeah.
However, they came back the next week and absolutely demolished a Nevada team who people are saying aren't very. They beat Purdue week 1, upset that game. And Purdue, remember, blew out Ohio State last year.
Right.
That's an impressive win there. Not that that's going to transfer throughout the entire season, but I do think a sneaky game. Oregon, of course, at Washington, but Oregon has 3 straight weeks where they play Washington, at USC, and home to Wazoo.
No, that's an interesting stretch.
Excuse me. If they beat Washington, I don't know how it'll work down at USC. USC blew out Stanford,
right?
Who we really don't know how good is right now.
Yeah, they're a question mark.
3 straight games. I mean, we'll talk about it more later. But I would have Oregon at number 1. I would have UW at number 2, Washington. Based on their previous seasons also and their talent, I think top to bottom, they're probably the second most talented team in the Pac-12. Then I'm going to go with Cal. I mean, Cal's been impressive. There's no reason not to. I mean, considering they beat Washington.
Yeah.
Then after that, I'm going to say Washington.
You say
Washington State.
Washington State?
Yeah, Washington State. Mike Leach, I always believe in air raid. I think that they have a talented team.
Oh, yeah.
I think that it's just tough. I mean, in the Pac-12, it's so unpredictable. You really never know what's going to happen. I mean, Colorado beat Nebraska, and Nebraska was a dark horse for the college football playoff.
I'm with you there. That was one where, with programs like with conferences like the Big Ten, you never know because they have some really interesting. There's really tough dynamics. It's a little bit similar to the Pac-12 in that it can be really anybody's game, and if you get a couple really solid wins, you're going to ride off that. And I think Nebraska was banking on a couple of those really solid wins. So I would say that's about right. So you've got Oregon at 1, Washington at 2, Cal at 3, Washington State at 4. What's up next for you?
I've got USC.
Okay.
I've got Arizona State.
Alrighty.
Arizona State's a tough one for me because they've beaten Michigan State 2 years in a row. I don't know if they found their secret or what it is because Michigan State's a good program, but they didn't finish the season off well last year. I don't know how I feel about their quarterback at the moment. They have a solid defense. I like Herm Edwards, but after that, it's a complete guessing game. I think UCLA could be after that, but I also think Oregon State can beat UCLA.
Where are you putting Utah in this mix?
Utah's a complete fluke there. I messed up. I should have Utah in about the 3rd or 4th position.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you say like 4 for Utah, 5 for Washington State?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd put Utah over them. I'm not totally sold on Utah yet. I know they got into the top 10 and people are thinking highly. I think Kyle Whittingham's a great coach, but it's a guessing game again.
Okay. So you've got it to about this top 7, and then you're saying it gets really murky in there?
Yes.
All right. So I agree with some of what you're saying. My issue is I am a purist. I am always like, if we're ranking a conference, loop back to record, loop back to conference record, how they've done so far. Because in my opinion, based on the season so far, because in my opinion, you can have all the talent in the world, but until that talent starts showing up, you got to work with what you've got. So far, I'm putting, and I think some people think I'm kind of crazy, but I'm putting Cal at 1, and it's because we're looking at a 1-0 win, and they've beat Ole Miss. And they had that upset versus Washington.
It's a good win at Ole Miss.
Those are 2 really big wins. And then besides that, they beat North Tennessee and UC Davis. Not 2 big ones, but the other 2 were pretty significant. And they're 4-0 in the season. I've got them first because in terms of conference resume, they're winning for me right now. But I'm also someone being a purist that in 1 week, I could have the whole ranking switch. So when people are like, oh, well, they've got great talent or they have got this great potential, I'm hesitant to rank teams on it because I'm like, you can have all the potential in the world, but if it doesn't play out, then it doesn't play out. So that's just my personal opinion. So that's why I have California 1.
Quick question here, though.
Yes, of course.
So picking Cal, they have one of the better defenses actually in the country, which is rare for Pac-12 football. Evan Weaver, one of the best linebackers, probably in the Pac-12. Do you think that a good defense, great defense maybe we could say, could beat a perhaps great offense, maybe in an Oregon or Washington?
Well, I think so that leads back to my number 2 is Oregon. Oregon's got a phenomenal defense as well.
Yeah.
They've got a defensive end who it's been quoted by some of their coaches that he could start NFL today. So in my opinion, I've also been someone I agree that defense wins championships. Because defense keeps offense from putting on the board. Your offense can, if they score once, but if your defense can keep the other team from scoring even once, it's going to win you the game. So for example, look at the Oregon State-Hawaii game. Oregon State was up by a touchdown going into that second half. If they didn't score for the rest of the game, it wouldn't matter if their defense could have kept Hawaii out of the red zone and from scoring. Doesn't matter. Doesn't look great for them that their offense doesn't score for that second half, but if your defense performs, then it doesn't really matter. So I'm definitely one who is leaning towards a strong defense. So I do think Cal. I think it's going to be really telling when Cal plays Oregon. But Oregon is very clearly also a defensive team, except Nevada was kind of an interesting one. I think that was a good resume builder for them. But in terms of conference play, it just came down to that they beat Stanford, and Stanford is not as strong as I think people think they are. And Cal had those big wins. Oregon lost to Auburn. That was one of their big resume builders. Had they won against Auburn, I would be putting them at first right now, but they're lost.
Legitimate playoff conversation.
Yeah,
which I believe
absolutely.
They're on the outside looking in for sure in the playoff, if that's a possibility. If they win out, of course, that's the only way it could happen.
Yeah.
And we have to hope some of these teams like Cal and UW win out until they play them, so their ranking looks better in that position.
Yeah, exactly.
But I agree.
Yeah, so I think that Oregon was really hoping that they had that win against Auburn because it's a resume builder. The Pac-12 is so up in the air. You never know who's going to be ranked or unranked when you play them. Cal wasn't ranked when the season started, and all of a sudden they're ranked. By the time you play them, it's going to be a ranked team. So I think that Oregon has the potential to be number one, but as of right now, with how their wins and losses stand, I have Cal over Oregon. And then followed up after that, I have Washington. Washington's loss against Cal was tough, but then they blew through Hawaii, blew through BYU and Eastern Washington, but their really only standing was versus Cal. But it was a tight game. It wasn't like it was a blowout. It was a
like
low-scoring
wake-up
game.
call almost.
It did. It definitely did. And I think that that's a big moment for them to say, okay, what can we do to change this? What can we do to do better?
New quarterback, new system working with it.
And then also after that, I've got Utah. And in Utah, I'm looking at because their only loss is to USC, which is a conference team. But I also have USC ranked right after Utah because I think they're probably pretty close. It wasn't that far of a score between the two during the game. It was 30-23. That's a pretty tight game. That's not anything to sniff at. And besides that, Utah they've been kind of favored for the season, and I think that they're one until that they have a really big loss. Either they're blown out, they really lose to someone they shouldn't have lost to. That I think they're kind of in that top 5 or 6. So I've got Utah and then USC. USC has jumped up from way from what I would have expected them for the rest of the season. So I've got USC, then Washington State, Arizona State, Colorado, UCLA, Arizona, Oregon State, and then Stanford. And here's why. So people kind of think, here's where it comes back into being a purist. First of all, Stanford is 1-3 in the season. They have only one win, and it was versus Northwestern, I believe. Their losses.
Always a good program, though.
Always a great program. Yeah, that was a good program. Looking at it at a Power 5 school, that was great. But then their losses were to USC, UCF, and Oregon. And within those, they lost to USC and Oregon. That's 2 losses for conference play. Granted, Oregon State and Arizona, as programs, probably not the strongest programs in the Pac-12, could be ranked at 0 if you simply based on talent or history or record. But in my opinion, as that purist, they're 0-0 in conference. Both teams are 0-0 in conference, which is a heck of a lot better than 0-2 in conference like Stanford. So until that playing field is evened out, I've got to have Stanford simply by my own personal standards of what a ranking should look like below those 2 teams.
You know, Stanford's an interesting one. They're always that team that you don't want to play in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
You know, they're kind of smash mouth football. They run it down your throats, and no one else does that. And maybe they can't or work with the physicality or what it is. But they have a great coach, David Shaw.
Yes.
Can't deny that. I have a feeling they might go on a little bit of a run here. Maybe win some games they shouldn't win.
Yeah.
UCF winning this program undefeated last year. They play Notre Dame later this year, so that's 2 of the 3 undefeated teams
really
last season
teams.
in the regular season, of course. But tough schedule at USC to start the season is always a little weird. You know, an in-conference game that they always have week 2. We'll see what happens. They still got KJ Costello.
Yeah.
You know, their quarterback, he's a veteran, 4th year. And they actually have Cameron Scarlett starting now, who was at Central Catholic in Portland, Oregon. And he's a 5th year.
Got some experience behind there. That's again where I am someone who will not live and die by my weekly rankings. I'm one who after this week,
that's a smart idea.
I will burn it if I have to, but it was accurate for that week. That's where my pure standard comes in that I have no qualms that after 1 week, this could look 10 times as different. But I feel like this, in my opinion, is an accurate representation of how teams have done so far in conference and non-conference play. But for those who are curious, let's kind of chat about what the Pac-12 has the rankings as. And then North, it starts with Cal, followed up by Oregon, which is a pretty normal stance. And then they've got Oregon State. Apparently in the Pac-12, they're valuing that 0-0 conference play. You have no losses, but you have no wins. Yep, so then followed up by Washington. And then after that, it looks like...
They must value the week-by-week
they do.
schedule as much as you do there.
Yes, they do. Washington to Washington State, followed up by Stanford for the Pac-12 North. And then looking at the South, it's headed up by USC, of all people, 2-0 in conference play. I think that's what they're really banking on. Followed up by Colorado, and then UCLA, Arizona, and then at 5, it looks like, as I'm checking my notes, because there are lots of teams here, 5 South is Arizona State, and then 6th in the South would be Utah, as having that 0-1 record.
See, those purely, that's interesting.
I think those are purely on conference standings, which is very interesting.
The thing with the South, I really think anyone other than Arizona has an outside chance at it.
That's what's interesting to me, is because if you told me like 3 years ago that Arizona,
so cool, 8.
Right,
Yeah.
Who by all means, man, is he
might be
old
one of
yet?
the most talented players in the country still.
Yeah, and I feel like he's been there for forever, but I feel like he's what, a senior, redshirt senior?
He's got to be up
something
there.
So he's been there as
Junior,
long as I've been
maybe.
here as a student at Oregon State, but that makes me feel old. It makes me think he's old. I'm like, man, you've been here for forever. I'm like, oh, that's how long I've been in college too. It's an ironic piece. But yeah, so I think that's something to be watching this season, is definitely where the Pac-12 standings are at for football. So as we're closing out, we got a few more minutes left here. Let's talk about what Oregon State football looks like for Stanford. What has to happen for the football team to be successful? What does a win for Saturday look like? What does a lose for Saturday look like for the rest of the season? Tell me your thoughts here, Soren.
I think with Stanford, based on what I've seen through the years and David Shaw, it's going to be a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes.
We don't have to score fast. I truly believe that. If we do, that's kudos to us. It will help, of course. More points on the board.
Yeah.
Make our field goals, make our extra points, get the points on the board. Let's run it. I think that with their team and how they've played so far, their offense hasn't really clicked from the highlights and games I've watched. Granted, they played some really tough offenses, but the thing with Stanford is they let the play clock run out and they hold the ball.
Yes.
Which can be annoying to watch. It can be annoying for other teams, but that's where the mentality comes in. You have to be mentally focused to play this team. And obviously finishing strong is going to be something I look in there, but I just want to see if our offense can get in a rhythm.
Yes. I think for me, one thing I cannot get out of my brain is I believe we did not play Stanford at home last year, and the last time we played Stanford at home was that forbidden Thursday night game that is seared into every Oregon State fan's memories. Our one shot at a Pac-12 win that year, we were so concerned, and Bryce Love wasn't even playing that game.
No.
You know, it was our one chance. We knew it. We could taste it. And I'm standing front row, and we're holding it, and it's right on the tip of our tongues. And, you know, we're ahead, and it's a minute and a half left, and one of my buddies turns to me, and he goes, if we get a first down here, we'll win the game. And I about smacked him across the face. It's like, shut up, just watch the game.
That is the ultimate jinx.
It was the ultimate jinx, because the very next play, Ryan Dahl fumbled the football and we lost the game. So, you know, I think that is, despite not necessarily that being under the same coaching staff at the same time, I think that's seared in a lot of players' memories. I think that's seared in a lot of fans'
coming
memories.
Back, yeah.
Oh yeah. There's something about that. It's kind of like when Oregon State went to Colorado and beat them at home a few years ago, and then doing it again last season. You remember things like that. They come back and they haunt you, even if it's not necessarily the same players. Those kinds of things stick around in a program, and I think that's something that's going to be tough for the team to manage in terms of mentality this game. I think that Smith has got a task ahead of him of helping them differentiate. It's a different year. We're a different team, different program, different circumstances, because it can be really easy to fall back, because there were players who played then, who are still playing now, who are a part of the team, who that's what they've got playing in the back of their head is how close it was. I think that's going to be tough. I think that this is, however, I like how you say that it is a marathon, not a sprint. That it's very important to maintain that consistency and that you can't just have that hard start and that slow finish. Otherwise, it's not going to be a successful game. I think this is also one of the Beavers' slim opportunities at a Pac-12 win for the year. That they're going to really want to consider this a successful season, which I've said before, compared to last, is 2 Pac-12 wins. If we're looking at 2 Pac-12 wins, it's a step, baby steps. So
3
yeah,
wins, that's better than last year.
Yeah, exactly. You just got to continue.
You need
That's
the
what they call
optimism
rebuilding.
as a Beaver fan.
I call it cautious optimism.
Cautious optimism.
Cautious optimism. Because I want to be optimistic, but I'm cautious because I know things can happen. But hey, it's football. You never know what's going to happen on the end of the line. So we're about to wrap up here in Corvallis. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners here, Soren?
If Oregon State can play their own version of football and not stay with Stanford's pace, as I was saying, the marathon or sprint, do that if it works. But we'll just have to see how it pans out.
I think that is about the sentiment for us here in Corvallis this week. All right. We want to thank you all for listening and sticking in today as we chatted about Oregon State sports and Oregon State football and Pac-12 football. We will see you all on Saturday a little before 4 p.m. and we've got Mitch and Matt in the booth to get some play calling and color commentary. Check us out on our social medias. It's at OMN Sports on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook to see some great content and learn more about when we're going to be on the radio next. And do you have anything that you'd like to say here, Soren?
Go to the game.
Yes, we're going to
Pack
have,
the
it'll be
stands.
fun.
We need it.
It'll be great. It'll be a fun time. And with that, we'll thank you guys for joining us. And I will leave that with a hearty Go Beavs here from Corvallis. You want to say it together? Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Go Beavs.